Hi, I'm Julia, and I've just hit the milestone of 42. Ever since I can remember, working hard and achieving independence have been my dreams. I've always wanted to carve out my own path, and thankfully, I've been able to do just that. From the moment I entered the professional world, being smart with money and seeking opportunities to grow financially were my top priorities. This drive didn't come from nowhere, it's something deeply rooted in my upbringing. My mom always emphasized the importance of financial independence, especially as I ventured into my career in corporate strategy analysis. Meeting Albert, my husband, felt like a breath of fresh air. He's the kindest soul you could ever meet, but I can't say the same about my in-laws. Despite their coldness, with little love from my sister-in-law, brother-in-law, and mother-in-law, Albert and I got married. It's been 12 years now, and like any couple, we've had our ups and downs. Lately, though, I've sensed a chill between us, and I can't help but wonder if it's connected to some big news we received a few months ago. I remember that day so clearly. I had just come home from work, buzzing with excitement over some fantastic news. As I walked into the kitchen, Albert greeted me. "Hey, babe." "Hey, honey," I replied, my voice full of joy. "Guess what happened today?" Albert's curiosity was piqued, and he urged me to share. I told him I'd gotten a promotion at work. Unable to contain my excitement, I even broke into our signature happy dance, a little tradition we've had for 12 years, celebrating all our big moments, graduations, our engagement, wedding day, and even the news of our pregnancy. But as my dance came to an end, I noticed Albert wasn't joining in. Confused and a little disheartened, I asked him why he wasn't participating. With a sigh, a mix of disappointment and frustration in his voice, he said, "I'm happy for you, babe." His response was so unlike his usual enthusiastic self, leaving me to wonder what was really going on between us. Then, Albert shared his own news. "I got laid off," he said, his voice low, head dropped in what seemed like a mix of sadness and shame. The room went quiet, the kind of silence that felt almost unbearable. I stood there, at a loss for words, suddenly feeling guilty for my earlier excitement. My good news must have felt like salt in the wound. "I'm so sorry, Albert," I said, trying to comfort him. "This is just heartbreaking." He shrugged it off. "Yeah, well, that's life, isn't it?" The heaviness of the moment hung in the air. "How about we go out tonight? A meal might cheer you up," I suggested, trying to lift the mood, but Albert wasn't interested. "I appreciate it, Julia, but I'm not really in the mood. I think I need some time alone," he said, then added, "Congratulations, by the way," making an effort to acknowledge my promotion. The following days were less tense, but a sense of discomfort lingered. It was clear resentment was growing between us. Given the situation, I understood why Albert might feel envious. He had always leaned toward traditional roles, wanting to be the sole breadwinner while expecting a spouse who focused on home care. But that kind of lifestyle hadn't been feasible for us. We prioritized our children's private education, and I've always believed in earning my keep and achieving financial independence, values my mother instilled in me from a young age. With my recent promotion, I was getting closer to securing a comfortable future for us. Meanwhile, Albert's job loss remained a sensitive issue. He spent his days in a slump, neglecting house chores and diving into documentaries and video games. I chose to be patient instead of confrontational. A month passed, but his demeanor didn't change. Even the visits from my in-laws, whom I've never gotten along with, were more tolerated than anything. I pushed aside my discomfort to support Albert and care for his needs. "It breaks my heart to see you this way," one of them said during a visit that had all of them, my sister-in-law, brother-in-law, and mother-in-law, under our roof at the same time. Their presence tripled the tension, creating an atmosphere in our home that was hard to bear. I braced myself for the critical and judgmental comments, hoping that, despite everything, my in-laws' visit might provide Albert with some comfort during this tough time. But nothing could have prepared me for Roy's shocking remark. "I'm honestly surprised it was you who got laid off," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I would have thought Julia would be the one in that position first, considering the way things usually go. You know, women are the ones who stay home with the kids more often." His outdated views left me speechless. Before I could respond, my mother-in-law barged into the room, her arms loaded with food and drinks for Albert, as if he were seriously ill rather than simply unemployed. "Oh, my poor baby," she exclaimed, her voice on the brink of tears. "This is just devastating." Albert tried to lighten the mood. "It's tough, but I'm not at death's door. Julia's been a huge support," he said, offering a weak smile, but his words did little to break the thick tension in the room. likely echoing Albert's traditional views, scoffed. A wife supporting her husband? What has the world come to? As if the situation weren't challenging enough, my sister-in-law suggested, maybe it's time to get dinner ready, we'll be here a while. Exhausted from my long workday, I felt my frustration building. After my promotion, I'd been pushing myself harder than ever, determined not to let up and show any weakness. The last thing I needed was more family drama, especially with Albert's job loss. I was already juggling the responsibilities of work and home life, and after a grueling day, I hoped for a bit of relief. Albert, do you think you could handle dinner tonight? I asked gently, hoping he could step up for once. On some days, he'd agree, but the results were often underwhelming, even though he used to be a decent cook before the layoff. With the kids staying with friends, it was just the two of us. Cooking for a crowd, especially with my in-laws now in the house, was the last thing on my mind. I'm really tired from work lately, I said, offering an alternative. How about we order in? There's this fantastic place that does amazing noodles. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law gasped dramatically, clearly taken aback. You're going to order takeout? We're your guests, my sister-in-law exclaimed, her voice rising in offense. We hardly ever get invited here, and this is the reception we get? My mother-in-law joined in. Noodles? Really? That's just not acceptable. This younger generation's ideas are spreading everywhere, even to us. Julia, we understand you're busy, but Albert's going through a tough time. As his wife, shouldn't you at least make us dinner? I felt cornered, exhausted, and frustrated, but to avoid further conflict, I gave in. I understand your family, not strangers, I said, my voice tight, but seeing how important this is to you, I'll make dinner. Just be patient. It might take a while, because I'm really tired. Just as I was about to start preparing the meal, Albert finally spoke up, his words taking me by surprise. She's been forcing me to cook dinner, he said quietly. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law looked as if they could hardly breathe from the shock. Roy's disapproval was evident on his face as he glared at me. She did what? How could you, Julia? That's so selfish, my brother-in-law snapped, accusing me of being the one at fault. Their judgment stung, making me question myself. Was I really the villain in their eyes for sharing household responsibilities with my husband, especially on days when I needed help? When I was utterly spent from work, Albert's voice cut through the exhaustion. I'm sorry, Julia, I didn't mean to make you out to be the bad guy, he said, though his words only seemed to add fuel to the fire. But it feels unfair to burden me with chores, given our roles, he added, echoing the antiquated beliefs that seemed to govern his expectations of marriage. Caught in a whirlwind of criticism for simply wanting a fair share of household responsibilities, especially during such exhausting times, I found myself apologizing for seeking balance in our partnership. Hearing the tremble in Albert's voice as he finished speaking softened my heart. It was clear he was struggling, caught in a grip of loss and confusion. Depression is a heavy weight that can immobilize even the strongest, leaving them adrift in a sea of hopelessness. Perhaps Albert was overwhelmed to the point where even the smallest tasks felt insurmountable. With that realization, I chose empathy over frustration. I'm so sorry, Albert. From now on, let me handle dinner and everything else. You don't need to worry about it, I assured him, swallowing my own frustrations. In the kitchen, I prepared the meal, serving it once everything was ready. The dinner table buzzed with conversation among Albert, Abigail, Roy, and Brittany, but I was left in silence, my presence either unnoticed or ignored. The earlier argument had felt so one-sided, and it stung to realize that Albert, too, seemed to see me through the lens painted by my in-laws' accusations. Despite the hurt, I set aside my pride. From that day forward, I took on the cooking and cleaning, adding to my already mounting stress and fatigue. As weeks turned into months, I continued to shoulder the burden of being the sole breadwinner. Thankfully, the recent promotion had provided a financial boost, but the reality was that our lifestyle, particularly our daughter's private schooling, couldn't be sustained on a single income. Albert's attitude towards me grew increasingly sour, his interactions brief, dismissive, like a child upset over a toy he could no longer have. It was time for a difficult conversation. Albert, we need to talk about our financial situation. It's unsustainable to keep going like this on my salary alone. We have to think about the girls and their schooling, I ventured, my voice steady despite the weight on my shoulders. He shot back defensively, but you have a job now, you got that promotion, remember? You're making more money now. Yes, Albert, I'm aware, but we need to face reality. Our daughter's education is costly, and we can't ignore that, I replied, trying to keep the frustration from seeping into my tone. His defensive stance softened as he saw the tears welling in my eyes, the strain of everything we were juggling finally breaking through. I know, he said quietly. I'm sorry, Julia, it's just that this situation has me stressed. His tone finally acknowledged the weight of our predicament. For the first time in a while, the walls between us seemed to lower. We both understood that we had to navigate this together. The journey ahead would require both of us to face our struggles, emotionally and practically, for the sake of our family. Albert finally acknowledged the need for action. You're right. I'll start looking for work tomorrow, he said, his voice filled with newfound resolve. But I had a different solution in mind, one that wouldn't require him to search far and wide for employment. Thanks to my consistent networking and positive rapport with my new boss, I was in a position to offer him an opportunity that might just solve our financial woes without him needing to take on the weight of another job search. I found myself in a unique position to help Albert. Despite our mutual preference for working at separate companies to maintain our individuality and keep our professional lives distinct from our personal relationship, however, desperate times called for unconventional measures. Actually, you might not need to look elsewhere, I proposed cautiously. I think I can secure a job for you at my workplace. Yes, I had taken the initiative to leverage my connections and goodwill to arrange a job opportunity for Albert at my company. Our decision to work together wasn't made lightly, considering how much we valued our independence, but, given our circumstances, it seemed like the most practical solution. Little did we know, this decision would set off a chain of events that would lead us into uncharted territory. Months into Albert's new role, he was thriving, showing remarkable progress at the company. Then, one evening, he came home with news that left me stunned. I've invited my mom, Abigail, and Roy over for dinner. I have some important news, he said, visibly excited. Following his request, I prepared dinner and welcomed our guests, eagerly anticipating the big reveal. During the meal, Albert announced his promotion, which was met with cheers and excitement from everyone. Despite my initial surprise at how quickly he had advanced, I couldn't help but feel joy for him and relief that he was emerging from his earlier despondency. But then, the celebration took an unexpected turn. Albert handed me a hotel key card, thinking it was a thoughtful gesture for a celebratory night away. I expressed my gratitude, imagining how much I needed a break. But then Albert's next words hit me like a slap. No, it's not a hotel room for us, it's a hotel room for you. I was left reeling. The situation was as bewildering as it was shocking, a twist I had never anticipated. It became clear that the dynamics of our relationship and professional lives were about to change in ways I hadn't expected. My confusion grew as I noticed that my in-laws seemed oddly satisfied with the situation, almost as if they had been plotting this moment. What's happening here? I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. Abigail took the lead, explaining that Albert had confided in them about his new job and how well he was doing. We suggested to him, she said, that considering his recent success and bonuses, it might be time for him to reevaluate his life and choices, especially after our last visit. We didn't appreciate your attitude then. I was stunned. They were not just proposing, but insisting that Albert and I take a break from each other because they believed I was mistreating him. Now that he was financially independent, they thought it was time for him to make a fresh start, without me. The idea that my husband, my partner of 12 years, could entertain such a notion due to his family's malicious influence was nothing short of heart-wrenching. Looking directly at Albert, my gaze filled with a mixture of anger and betrayal. I watched as he quickly turned his eyes away, unable to meet mine. His family, on the other hand, seemed to relish the turmoil they had stirred up, suggesting it was for the best now that Albert was the primary earner. So you're essentially kicking me out of our home? I asked, incredulous. The response was cold and unyielding, steeped in the outdated belief that the man, as the head of the household, had the final say, regardless of our joint contributions. The injustice of it all ignited a fury within me I hadn't known I possessed. Without another word, I stood up, unable to contain the storm brewing inside me. I stormed off, packing only what I could carry, overwhelmed by a mix of sadness, anger, and disbelief. Seeking refuge at my best friend's house, I spent the night in tears, trying to make sense of how everything had spiraled so far down. But as the shock began to subside, a shift occurred within me. What had once been despair transformed into a fiery resolve. If they thought they could discard me so easily, they were mistaken. Determined to uncover the truth behind Albert's sudden financial success and the bonuses that had caught me off guard, I focused my energy on seeking justice, not out of vengeance, but to expose the lies and deceit that had been thrust upon me. The following morning, I called in sick, knowing that Albert would be at work. I used the time to return to our home and begin my search. It didn't take long to find evidence of his betrayal. In his office, I uncovered files and emails detailing Albert's embezzlement of company funds, a scheme involving our new boss. The evidence was damning. I saved everything to a USB drive, understanding the magnitude of what I had just discovered. Heart heavy, I packed more of my belongings, realizing that returning home was no longer an option. At my friend's house, I pieced together a detailed presentation of the evidence, preparing to expose the truth. The next day, I contacted HR and the company's higher-ups, requesting an urgent meeting. Keeping the details vague, I also informed Albert, under the guise of a fiscal planning emergency. When the meeting was set, I dressed carefully, knowing the weight of what was about to unfold. As I entered the conference room, I felt a mix of exhilaration and nerves. Albert and our boss arrived last, their faces betraying panic at the sight of the leadership team gathered. I took control, presenting the evidence of their embezzlement. The room shifted from curiosity to shock, then to outrage. Albert and the boss were visibly rattled. As the truth became undeniable, one executive even suggested jail time for their crimes. Throughout it all, Albert's glares burned with anger and betrayal. Despite his attempts to undermine me, I stood firm, driven by the need to expose the truth. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. Albert, desperate and furious, shouted that I was lying and threatened to destroy me, even vowing divorce. His explosive reaction only further revealed the man he had become, driven by greed and desperation. As he attempted to storm out, security guards, whom I had stationed outside, blocked his path. The evidence was overwhelming, and the outcome was clear. Both Albert and our boss were dismissed and faced legal charges. Their departure was met with a media frenzy that I had orchestrated by tipping off journalists. The image of Albert, captured as he struggled to post bail, was a fitting testament to his actions and their consequences. In the days that followed, the investigation revealed that the scheme ran deeper, implicating my brother-in-law Roy. My in-laws, who had been so eager to remove me from our home, were not just acting out of disdain, they were removing an obstacle to their criminal enterprise. The revelation that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law might also be involved added another layer of betrayal to the situation. With Roy likely facing similar consequences, the full extent of their family's conspiracy came to light. Their collective downfall was harsh, but it was the necessary consequence of their actions. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but feel the panic that must be coursing through my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. They knew it was only a matter of time before their involvement was uncovered. Through all of this, I found myself grateful for uncovering the truth when I did, preventing even greater harm. My actions had not gone unnoticed. My company's leadership, recognizing my diligence and integrity, offered me a significant promotion, an acknowledgement of my hard work and resilience. I'll be stepping into my former boss's role next week, with a considerable pay increase and bonuses. Looking forward, I know the next step is divorce. Staying married to someone involved in criminal activities is simply not an option. With my stable financial situation and unblemished legal record, I'm confident custody of our children won't be a battle. The future ahead is bright, and I am genuinely excited for this new chapter. This marks a major turning point in my life, one where deceit is no longer part of my story. Actions have consequences, and in this case, it seems that everyone is finally facing their just rewards.